You are listening to the Marc Guzman Podcast Experience. Before we get started, just a reminder that you can find all of my available rental properties on my website at marcguzman.com. If you own investment property, click on the Owner Services section to see our complete list of services. This episode is brought to you by Beniked Commercial Real Estate. There's more to building wealth in real estate than simply buying and holding. You need to have an entry and exit strategy. You need to know when to invest, have a plan to maximize return during the holding period, and have an exit strategy to sell and exchange the property into a bigger investment. This takes a set of highly qualified professionals to guide you from buying your first investment property to eventually upgrading to the 100-unit complex, providing wealth for you and your family. Brian Beniked and David Peel have over 35 years of combined experience specializing in helping families build wealth through real estate. They assist you in putting your investment on autopilot and will guide you along each exchange. Visit them at www.bcre.co. Again, that's www.bcre.co to give your future a jumpstart. Rarely does a week go by when the California housing crisis is not brought up. This week is more of the same, as once again more and more news is coming out regarding Bay Area residents leaving the Bay Area, citing the high costs and lack of housing availability. Today on Highest and Best, we have Steve Peterson with Infinity Investments. For the past 10 years, Steve has been one of the more involved real estate professionals in the Bay Area market. We ask him why he thinks residents are being crunched out of the Bay Area, as well as what can be done to keep them from moving. We also discuss commercial real estate, as well as his involvement with the California Association of Real Estate Brokers, which seeks to provide opportunities for minority brokers and home buyers. So, Steve, thanks for coming on to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Mark. It's my pleasure.
So I'm excited for this because you're in a completely different field of real estate that many people really are not exposed to. Many people are exposed to just home buying, home selling, and that's it.
Yeah.
That's their real estate experience. I've gotten to know you a little bit more recently, and you do commercial real estate.
Yeah.
So how's that been? I mean, how did you get into commercial real estate to begin with?
Yeah, no, actually, and I got into commercial real estate 2003. I was at San Jose State at the time, and I actually ordered the Carlton Sheets No Money Down course one night, up late night.
I remember that.
Oh, man, that's what got me going. And then what I figured out at the time I was studying finance, I just gravitated towards apartment buildings more than single-family homes as I was reading and studying, and that's what I said that's what I wanted to do. So I started, my first deal was a 6-unit deal building out in Pueblo, Colorado, and so I've just been doing apartments ever since, man. And it is a different animal. It's definitely a little bit more difficult to break in, but it's also very rewarding as well. And so it's not easy, but I literally got into the business one fateful evening, probably 1 or 2 in the a.m., ordering Carlton Sheets No Money Down, and then
I think that's the most successful infomercial, right?
It's got to be, because it ran for I think 2 decades, something like that. You know, so and when you ordered that course, I mean, it was a really good course, and that's also what inspired me to go to get my CCIM designation. And be a part of the CCIM organization, because in that course he talks about if you're going to work with brokers, you want to work with CCIM. And so I was like, what is that? And so I looked into it and got heavily involved, and now I've got the designation.
So that's interesting. Like I was tempted to buy that same program,
yeah.
but I never bought it because it's an infomercial, right?
Yeah, of course. Yep.
But I never really knew anyone who bought the program, so I really didn't have any experience with it or knew someone that had experience with it. So it was a good program then.
It was, it's one of the better educational programs I've been through now. The CCIM education and curriculum is very intense.
Now, that's not the one where they tell you to buy tax lien properties.
That's a different one. There's another one that's in tax. Carlton Sheets is the no money down. So what he's talking about is creative financing strategies like lease options to buy, seller carry financing, wraparound mortgages. But what was probably most significant is he goes through a detailed way of analyzing rental property, whether it's a single-family house or a 100-unit apartment building or 20-story skyscraper. He breaks down the cash flow model of how to analyze property. And that was the most significant thing that I got out of it. Obviously, also learning how to structure creative deals and find deals, but learning how to analyze properties because in apartments and any type of commercial real estate, the income determines the value. Mm-hmm. And if you mess up on a couple of line items, it could be devastating. So that's what that course did. And then fast forward to my involvement with CCIM, it's like that's the Carlton Sheets course on steroids, because when you go through CCIM course, it's like a 1-week course, but it's really like a full semester MBA level course that they squeeze into 1 week, and it's all about commercial investment real estate analysis.
So to get CCIM, it's not multiple classes; it's all crammed into 1 week.
No, it's yeah, good question. It's multiple classes, multiple 1-week classes, and there's an intro course like a 2-day. Then there's 4 core courses that are 1 week long. You could also do them online, but they're very intense. And then you've got to also have what's called a portfolio of experience. So you got to do a certain amount of business, about $10 million of commercial real estate, over 10 separate transactions in the last 5 years. Submit that portfolio along with passing the classes, and then you can take the exam. And the exams are 6-hour, brutal exam, and if you pass it, you got the designation. So it's you got to do a certain amount of business, you got to close a certain amount of deals, and you got to have some academic skills and having sat through those classes as well. So it's rigorous.
Yeah, David Pio introduced me to CCIM, and him just bringing me around and just seeing the high level quality brokers that are there is just incredible.
It is, man. It is.
And these are people that are selling, that are heavy big hitters like yourself, but that are super experienced and know what they're talking about.
Right, and that's key, man, because a lot of brokers who are top producers may not understand. Because a lot of times if you're good at sales, man, you can sell anything, especially nowadays with the internet and marketing, all the different tools you can do. So you can sell anything. When it gets down to the nitty gritty of the meat and potatoes of any type of transaction, that's where a lot of the CCIM education comes into play, because you're dealing with complex, situations with rents, tenants, potential rents, income, expenses. So a lot of even top producing brokers in commercial real estate still don't know how to drill down to understand the value of a lease, or drill down to understand the net present value of the property today when you look out over 5 years. A lot of that stuff is, people don't know. Mm-hmm. And if you don't go through the process of getting that education and learning it, you're not going to know. And when let's say you're closing a lot of deals, it's difficult to take that time off. So with CCIM, you have people who are making business happen, but also have dedicated the time to get that knowledge so that they can, transact in a way that is really kind of head and shoulders above the marketplace.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Now, to be a good broker in the field that you're doing, you have to be really good at math and analyzing numbers, right?
Yeah, and you do. And there's a lot of, if you're not, you have to have a basic understanding of it. And then the calculations, there's a lot of systems and programs, out there where, we used to use the financial calculator. Now there's a spreadsheet and you just plug it in, you know what I'm saying? So you don't have to be a math expert. You got to understand the concepts, though. You know what I'm saying? To at a basic level, because like I said, some brokers, top producing guys don't understand this stuff. But you got to at least be able to communicate it. And the better you understand it, the better value you can bring to the table to your client, or to the deal. Let's say if you're buying a property, to the deal, to the transaction you're working on.
So in your experience, when someone's buying a commercial property, and for most people, when you tell a commercial, they think like a commercial office space building, but a commercial is anything 5 or more units. Yeah. So when someone's buying, let's say, a multi-unit building, what's been the biggest mistake that you see from a buyer's side that they make?
Yeah. Oh, man. And we've seen a lot. So I started in 2003, right? So I was in the last market cycle. And the biggest thing during that time, from like 2003 to 2008, was that a lot of people were buying properties on pro forma. And what pro forma means is that's a projection. Pro forma, I think, is Latin for the form it will take. So pro forma, right? So what happens is a lot of people, a lot of banks and lenders were lending and buying properties on pro forma, on projected rental income and expenses. You always want to buy on actual income and expenses. So that it still remains today the number one mistake I see people make, not only in multifamily properties, but office buildings, hotels, industrial, people buying on pro forma.
Because and I assume you also see that a lot in rent control cities where they think they could increase rents, but wait a minute, you really can't. There's limits.
And I mean that's huge because people think, okay, well this person's paying $500 and I can get them out and I can go now and get $2,500 or whatever it is. You can legally buy tenants out, and that's a whole nother conversation and all of that. But that's something that landlords can do. But it's not cheap, right? So you're not going to just come to somebody and say, hey, here's $2,000, I want you to move, and think they're going to take it and go somewhere in a rent control environment. Because if that person's paying $500 and now they have to move, they're going to be looking at paying $2,500 or whatever the rent is. So they're not just going to say, hey, let me just move out the way. So in a rent control market, you really got to be careful because it's a double-edged sword in rent control markets. The reason there's rent control because there's so much demand that it's crazy, right? So a lot of people say, I don't want to deal with rent control. I don't want to deal with rent control. The flip side of that, you may buy somewhere like a Stockton or something that's not in rent control, but you're not going to have the same rent growth. Mm-hmm. You're not going to have the same rent. So you can't just come in there and say, I'm going to take the rents from $1,000 to $1,500. So, but in a rent control market, your hands are tied. So a lot of people make that mistake. You're seeing it a lot right now. Buildings are trading 3% cap rates in East Oakland in a rent control market. And you're not getting those tenants out unless you pay them and then pay them handsomely. And then that goes into the calculation of your return based on what you bought the building for, what you have to fix it up if you have to fix it up, and then any cost to buy tenants out of that lease.
Unless you get super lucky. Like I have a client who bought a building in Oakland, and out of nowhere, 2 tenants said, "Hey, we made plans. We're moving out of state."
And that, I mean, you hit
that's like hitting the lottery.
You hit the nail on the head unless you get because at the end of the day, people move. It's rarer when you have a rent control. So for instance, somebody paying $500 a month versus somebody who's paying $1,500, and maybe the market rent's $2,000. If you're paying $1,500, you're getting a $500 discount. If you're paying $500, that's $1,500, and those guys typically don't move. However, I did just sell a building, and it was a very similar situation. Somebody they put in a notice and they moved while we were in escrow. So the buyer, I think the rent there was like $900, and they moved out, and now she's looking at getting about $1,800 for that unit, and that was just luck of the draw. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it's when people buy properties on the projections and not the reality. It's the biggest mistake I see people have made in the old market cycle, and I'm seeing people going back to that formula, which is a recipe for disaster.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but like for me, it feels like the environment right now, it's like 2006.
That's funny. It's exactly like 2006, and I wouldn't say 7 and 8 yet, but it's 2006.
Everyone's desperate to buy. Everyone's jumping into the market.
Yep.
They don't care what they're paying. Yep. They're just going in to buy something.
Yeah. And it's all the economy's doing good. Jobs reports looking excellent. Everything looks fantastic. That's how it was in 2006. Everything was looking rosy, and then it quickly changed. And I don't, I don't think we're in for a crash like we had before. I mean, that was kind of crazy. But at some point, the market's going to correct. That's what markets do. They go up, they go down, they go sideways. They don't stay the same. That's what they don't do. They don't stay the same. So, but when you see in an environment like this, like what you said, people need to buy. If you sell a property or exchange, then you need to buy. But the key is to buy on the actuals and to buy right. And buying right just simply means sticking to your criteria. Whatever you set up, I'm going to go buy and I'm going to do this. You got to kind of stick to that. Because if you don't, you're taking a big risk. If the market corrects in a couple of years, you could be in a bad spot. If the market keeps rolling like it is forever, then you'll be fine. But the reality is, it just doesn't happen like that. At some point, it changes, and I think you hit the nail on the head. It does feel like 2006, exactly like 2006.
So I just got this question this morning, and for many people that don't have a commercial property, they don't own anything over 5 units, they're not quite sure. They're a little timid in jumping into it because they're just not quite sure how that entire process works. But one of the common questions I get, and I literally just got this maybe an hour before you came onto the show, is how much down payment do I need to purchase a building? And you hear a lot of people say, oh, 25% down payment. But that's not always the case.
Right.
So how do you determine the down payment you need to purchase a property?
That's a great question, and it does depend. It depends on a few things, the cash flow of the building being number one, because banks are going to look at a property and underwrite it based on the debt coverage ratio. The debt coverage ratio for commercial properties is very similar to the debt-to-income ratio for residential properties. In fact, it's pretty much the same thing. The difference is in commercial, you use the income from the property as the primary source of qualifying. I mean, in fact, that's what you use. You're not using your personal income. It's just the income from the property. In a residential, like a fourplex or something, they'll look at your personal income, and I think they'll give you 75% of the rents in the building. But in commercial, it's all on the building. So that a bank may say, hey, we'll go up to 70 or 75% loan to value, right? Which would mean you'd have to put 25 to 35% down. But if the numbers aren't strong enough, they'll come back and say, well, we could go up to this amount, but we only can give you 60% loan to value. Therefore, you have to put 40% down. So the first thing
that would be based on the debt to coverage ratio.
Debt coverage ratio. Yep. And so if the income is, and we're talking about when we say income, the net operating income. You collect your gross income, you pay your expenses, and what's net is what you pay your mortgage payment with. And that ratio, right now, lenders, the most conservative lenders or most aggressive lenders, let's say, are at a 1.17 debt coverage, which is tough. Which is good. I've seen a couple lenders at 1.225 debt coverage. That's tough to get to because the numbers have to be really, really strong to get to 1.225. 1.17 is a little bit more realistic for the Bay Area. Mm-hmm. But it's something with the 1.17 coverage. Most banks are not going to want to go over 65% loan to value, which means 35% down is what you'd need. And so I'd say as a typical rule of thumb in the Bay Area, 30 to 35% down is what you're going to be looking at, and you may have to go 40% down if you're in an Oakland or San Francisco or San Jose Peninsula type area where the cap rates are really low, like a 4% cap rate or something like that. You got to come in with a little bit more money down. We sold a building last year, and one of my agents in my office in East Oakland at a 3.8 cap. The buyer had to put 60% down. So, wow. You know what I mean? Yeah. Now, that lender goes up to 70%, but on that property, they only went 40%. And the buyer was happy about it because instead of them paying cash, they can get some amount of a loan and then preserve their cash to come in and fix the property up, which they did. So, and I know that sounds a little bit crazy, 60% down, but, in the Bay Area, we see a lot of cash transactions. That's kind of what it is. I would say rule of thumb, though, 30, 35%.
Yeah, I think it's hard for a lot of people to really kind of wrap their head around, well, how can you go from, if you do up to 70%, how can you require, or only go up to a 30 or 40% loan, right? And so one of my ideas is to create a show where we sit down and basically pick actual properties. Analyze it and break down
that'd be a good one.
What you would actually need to come in to buy it. That's one of my ideas. So that'll be
I mean, why that would be good is because then you put the actual pen to paper and show people this is the formula. This is how we came up with how much the property can support debt wise, and therefore this is how you would calculate how much you need to put down. And I think for a lot of investors, what I see is consistent. And Dave Pio and I have we've done a lot of classes at residential associations to agents and brokers who want to make that same transition from singles to 4 units up to commercial. And I think it's a lot of investors who are in that same boat. I think that's just they say, hey, I've mastered this single family or up to fourplex game. Now I want to move up, but a little apprehensive, so I need to get the knowledge. And the biggest key to getting people more comfortable, I believe, is getting them comfortable with the numbers. Because when they're comfortable with the numbers, it's real estate's real estate. Whether it's a skyscraper or a little 2-bedroom house, it's still real estate. A lot of the principles are the same. The biggest thing that's different is how the numbers affect the value. Mm-hmm. And so once folks get a clear understanding of that, they get a comfort level of that, then I believe then they can start applying their expertise that they've built up over the years to each situation. But it's just understanding those numbers, which affect a lot of things. It affects the value, affects your rate of return, affects the loan amount, and that's I think the biggest barrier to making that step up into commercial.
Now, recently you were on a panel for the Young Professionals Network.
Yeah.
And I think you did it along with the other panelists, and we had Zulian Morales here on the podcast a few weeks ago.
Yeah, Zulian's great.
Yeah. And actually, we also had Keith Robinson, too, on the podcast.
Oh, wow. Okay. You got Keith in there? All right.
Yeah. And I think we're trying to schedule Marco.
Okay,
too. Yeah, we'll see about that. But, it was a great panel. Whole diversity. You were there on stage to really talk about the African American community, home ownership. So why don't you recap for us a little bit about that event and some of the key points, because it's really home ownership amongst that community that's a big issue. And I know you're really involved with CAREB and really trying to push those numbers higher. Yeah,
and man, absolutely right, Mark. And so this year it's an interesting year for me because I'm currently the president of NorCal CCIM, which is the Northern California chapter of the National CCIM Institute. And I'm also president of the California Association of Real Estate Brokers, CAREB, which is the California state chapter of NAREB, National Association of Real Estate Brokers, which is the Black Brokerage Association. So NAREB was formed in 1947. Blacks and other minorities at that time were not able to join NAR or the respective local associations.
Until what year could they join?
You know what? I believe that was, I'm not exactly sure. I believe that was in the 60s. And I know in Oakland, at least it was 60s, I believe it was, where blacks and minorities were able to join. I know certainly as part of Fair Housing, the Fair Housing Act 1968 would have squashed any of that. But I believe it was, I believe we were able to join the Realtors before 1968.
Okay.
That's maybe some good research for us to do. I don't exactly know. But I know that NAREB was formed, for that purpose. And, and back in the day, you can imagine our MLS, think about our MLS right now. It's all online, right? People who, can go to Realtor.com or Redfin and all of a sudden they have access to the MLS. Well, in those days, the MLS was a book, man. It was a list, you know what I mean? And you signed.
Dude, when I got into the business, in 2003. My office was still, we were online at the point, but my office still, for a few agents, we're still getting that book.
Yeah. And we used to get that book. What's that, like the Metro list? It was a book that we used to get, like 05, 06. It was still a book. And so in 1940, whatever, you can only imagine, how that was. So if you didn't have access to that book, and you had a property to sell and you wanted to buy, it was, we think inventory is tight now. Think about what it was in those days. So that's what NAREB was formed about. And now, NAREP and ARIA are formed, and there's a much more powerful minority presence in the real estate business. In those days, it was not. And so NAREB was the leader in stepping forward and standing for democracy in housing. And they championed all the fair housing laws and so forth. And so for me, this year is an interesting year because two organizations I care deeply about, I'm happy to be the president about, which is fantastic. It kind of, I don't have much of a personal life this year. All my friends keep asking me, where are you at? I'm like, well, I'm handling business and doing this and that. That's just what it is. And so when I work with CAREB is really, really important to me. I'm born and raised in East Oakland. And what we were talking about on that panel is, diversity in real estate and what are some of the, we have challenges to home ownership in the minority space. All of us, African Americans, Hispanics, and Asians. African Americans has the lowest percentage of home ownership, then followed by Hispanics and Asians. And so we were in the panel. We were talking about, well, why is this? How is this? What do we do about it? And there's a couple different reasons why. And African Americans and Hispanics are closer in the numbers. And first of all everyone lost a lot of properties in the last market cycle. Yeah. Right? Everyone was affected, for sure. Blacks and Hispanics were affected more. And I mean, we can go into a variety of reasons as to why, when, all this stuff. But a lot of the subprime loans that were made to, to blacks and Hispanics, and they were made in areas, in the inner cities. And so when the crash happened, a lot of wealth was stripped at that point in time. And then what's happened, especially in Oakland, let's say, a lot of people were also kind of scarred by this. A lot of people lost properties. It was traumatic, and they didn't want to come back and buy. So one thing we've been struggling with at NARAB, and by the way, we're called a realtist. So if you're a member of NARAB and any one of the branches, we are called a realtist as opposed to realtors.
Okay.
Right? And so that's just a little fun fact. But,
So basically the entire trust in the system and in the industry got wiped out.
Got wiped out, man. And think about this also as well. And this was heavy in the Hispanic community. A lot of Hispanics and a lot of folks who didn't know what they were signing. But especially in the Hispanic community, I've heard this so many times from good friends and agents and people who are dealing and clients, and they were just like, we just signing away. We didn't know what we were signing. But we were chasing the American dream. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And unscrupulous brokers, mortgage brokers, banks, lenders, playing the blame game, in my opinion, is not productive. But setting forth policies and working within the community to develop mindsets is important. And so, the trust, people lost trust in buying a home. People lost trust in the professionals who are helping them out. Nobody trusts the banks. Even the banks don't trust the banks. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so now it's this thing of, okay, now that the market has come back, people love real estate again. Mm-hmm. Problem is, it's so dang expensive to get into the inner Bay Area that a lot of people are priced out. So what we've been doing is the last few years, NARAB has this push of 2 million additional black homeowners in 5 years. That was started in 2016. And a big part of what we're having to do is get in feet to the street, get in the community, and talk about home ownership, the benefits of it, why you should do it, and then talk to people about how do you do it. And the biggest myth that we see is people think you have to have 10 to 20% down to buy a home. Mm-hmm. And that's not true. You can buy a home with 3.5% down plus closing costs, and there's down payment assistance with that. The biggest thing is you have to have provable income. Yeah. So now it's telling that story about home ownership, letting folks know why they should buy, and markets go up, markets go down. Here's responsible ways to buy so that this doesn't happen again. And then, okay, now is the how do we go out and do it? And the challenge today that we're seeing, now that I think that the story, the narrative, the mindset is changing, especially in the black community, especially in the Hispanic community, the challenge is how do we get our hands on some inventory in our areas, right? Yeah. And that's a struggle. That's a real big struggle. And so part of like what we're doing at KRAB, we're working on some policies that when properties get foreclosed in the state of California, they would be made available to homeowners a little bit longer. I'm a real estate investor. I'm a commercial real estate, but I think it's important for people to own homes. And what happened in the last market cycle as well is a lot of hedge funds, a lot of big-time investors began buying single-family homes. Typically, they'll stay in the commercial real estate space. Mm-hmm. But they saw opportunity. At the end of the day, they saw opportunity, so they hopped on it. What happens is that priced out a lot of homeowners that were, wanting to get into these areas, now having to deal with investors. And now prices have shot up. So it's very difficult for the homeowner, but it's not impossible.
I remember back then because I ended up selling quite a few foreclosures in between 2007 and 2011. And I remember when they came down with new regulation that if you're going to sell foreclosure, you have to give like a 2-week period for homeowners prior to selling to investors.
Yeah. And I remember when that came down, a lot of investors was like, and my thing, I told a couple clients at the time who were wanting to go. A lot of guys at those times, even apartment owners, were wanting to try to buy 20 and 30 houses at a time. And so they were trying to cut deals with the banks and all this and that. And there was a few properties, individual houses just that would sit. And if something is so beat up, homeowner's not going to buy it because homeowner wants to usually buy something that they can move into and or buy something they can put a little elbow grease in, not want to buy something that they got to completely rehab and tear out the plumbing and electrical. Homeowners ain't trying to do that. but investors are. So like my thing to the investors was like, look, if a house is so beat up and the bank puts it out for homeowners for 2 to 3 weeks and a homeowner don't buy it, that puts you in a better negotiating position because you can then come to the bank and say, well, look, you try to sell it to the homeowners. They couldn't buy it because it's so beat up. Now you need to drop the price to reality and let me take it off your hands. And so that, and we saw a lot of those regulations kind of came in towards the end. A lot of the REOs got snatched up. And now we're in a different marketplace, and it's so expensive. And you living in the Bay, man, everybody's pointing fingers. Oh, I was just, it's the developers making everybody expensive. It's gentrification. It's tech companies.
Sam pulled up a very good article where they did a poll, and they were polling people today, who's to blame for the housing inventory shortage, and number one blame, developers.
Right. And that's crazy, man. At the end of the day, developers just trying to build more units, housing units, and
that's how they make their money.
That's how they make their money. But again, a lot of the public don't understand that, and so, I'm in a unique situation in the sense of I run a business, I invest, I sell commercial real estate. But I'm also community focused, you know what I mean? So I see both sides of the fence. So but I know the development process. I know the real estate investment process, and I know what it's like to be a tenant, trying to make a way. And so that's why I said the blame game. See, people blaming everybody else, that accomplishes nothing. And the biggest thing to do is to make a plan and start working on it. And right in the Bay, we got to remember, man, this is like one of the premier places in the entire world, not just in the country. Let's face it, in the world, man. The weather's outstanding, the landscape's outstanding, the economic opportunities are, I don't know where there's a better job situation. I don't know where there's a better place to start a company in sense of what you can build it into, the opportunities. The reality of that, what comes with that is cost, man. Yeah. It's been a housing crisis. I got in real estate in 2003. It's been a housing crisis ever since then, and probably before then in the Bay Area.
It's just worse now.
It's just worse, And you think about it, it is very difficult to build in the Bay. Regulations, laws, the cost, a cost of land, cost of construction, it's difficult. So if we're in Texas, where you could just build and build and build and build and build like they do, the cost of everything wouldn't be so much. But we got mountains and bay and oceans all around us. So you can't just build and build and build. And then the cost doesn't prevent it. So, you have this pent up demand, and then everybody's frustrated, and the finger gets pointed to developers. And then there you go. And, all developers ain't good either. But bottom line is we need more housing units. And like you see what's happening in San Francisco. They built all them units over there. The rental market has cooled off significantly in San Francisco. And in fact, I've had people tell me that they've seen rents come down as much as 5% in San Francisco over the last year or 2 years because they built.
Usually trickles out this way, too.
Oh yeah, it's coming. And you see it in Oakland. I think there's 14,000 units in the queue. When those units all hit, what's going to happen to rents is they're going to go down. Because you have now more supply, right? And then there's demand for it, but it takes time to absorb. The rents the developers thought they was going to get, they're probably not going to get, by the time they get finished. And that's just how the cycle works. Yeah. So, versus blaming folks, we got to get active. And that's what, like at the Realtist, that's what we're doing. That's why I was on that panel, trying to get the word out to folks, brokers, agents, people in the community, the importance of home ownership, but not just home ownership, investment property ownership. Because you put yourself in a position of ownership, it makes it very difficult for you to get pushed out. If a landlord wants to come in and renovate the building or raise the rents or whatever, if you own your place and you take care of your business, very difficult for you to get pushed out of anywhere, number one. And then number two, you benefit from all the growth that's going on around. If you just rent in a unit, you're not benefiting for that. So now you are frustrated, And so, like, the whole thing is, like, get together, get a plan, work your plan, be a part of what's going on in the Bay Area. Don't just allow yourself to get pushed out. But I think I read something the other day. It said something like about 40-something% of the people in the Bay Area are planning to move. And
they just announced that. I heard that on the radio today, too.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, they said 46% of Bay Area residents are planning at some point in the future to move out of the Bay Area. But I think that's been the case.
Yeah.
for so many years because it's expensive to live here.
That's right.
And so everyone's like, oh, yeah, I can move to Texas.
Right.
Okay. Will you?
And what you going to do in Texas? Because everything's relative.
Yeah.
The money you're making here, you ain't going to make in Texas. Now, that depends, right? If you got a technology company and you got the same.
Well, yeah, you can always nitpick certain cases.
But the majority of the case, I sell real estate. If I pick up and move and I get paid on a percentage basis, right? 3%, whatever it is. On my average sale price about $1.1 million, right? If I go to Texas, I'm selling apartment. That's not going to be my average sales price. I'm selling mid to small size apartment buildings. My average sales price is going to be $500,000. So I'm going to take a 50% pay cut as soon as I move out there. So that's the thing I'm saying. If you love this Bay Area, you call this place home, man. You got to figure out a way to stay here, and you got to figure out a way to benefit from the growth. It ain't easy, but it's possible. And ownership of property. Ownership of investment property, ownership of business, ownership of your life, man, is what it's all about. You got to take ownership. And so I think that's the message that's a consistent message. I would think at NAREP, I would think at ARIA, certainly at NARAB and the Realtors. CCIM organization, that's our mantra. I mean, we're brokers, but we preach, all brokers should be owning investment property. It's putting yourself in that position of ownership. And the actual material ownership only comes after you set your mind up as hey, I'm going to be an owner, I'm going to be an entrepreneur, and it may take years to materialize, but you got to start somewhere.
Yeah, the biggest reason that was cited was really for the high cost of housing.
Yeah.
And again, you go back to an affordability problem, but is it affordability problem or is it an inventory problem?
Yeah.
I saw the economist Chris Thornburg just recently over in Walnut Creek, and he's like, look, it's not an affordability problem, it's a inventory problem.
Yeah, I would
and that's
agree.
causing the illusion of an affordability problem.
No, I agree. And actually there are I just I saw a duplex, not my listing, but I saw one yesterday for like $400 something grand. I sent it to a client in East Oakland, and I'm sitting here saying, hey, this is the Bay Area, this is the big leagues, but you can buy a duplex for $500,000. That's actually a real decent price. What happens is that's one out of however many, man. There's not enough inventory. There's more buyers than there is inventory. It's been like that probably since like 2012, 2013 for sure. But, when the market was down, right? When you could buy a house for $100,000 in the East Oakland, you could buy some Oakland Hills for $500,000.
I was selling homes in Richmond for $18,000.
Now, I remember at the same time people saying we got the same housing crisis. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But and you couldn't convince people to go and buy a house. I mean, some people did, but I'm just telling you. I mean, I was, Richmond a house $18,000. I remember Victorian and West Oakland I was trying to sell for $119,000. People didn't want it, and so but quickly that shifted in about 2012, 2013. There's more buyers than there is inventory, and so of course, it's gonna feel like you're in this maze of unaffordability and impossibility because you keep going around and around. Everybody's fighting for the same thing, and so then the price gets jacked up. We need more inventory at the end of the day, Now,
you said something interesting a few minutes ago about rents in San Francisco dropping by about 5%.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you brought that up because I recently, just last weekend, I interviewed for a 15-unit building in San Francisco, right by Golden Gate Park, too.
Oh, wow.
Like a nice area. And they were asking me about rent prices in San Francisco. And I told them, look, you're not competing. And there were, in that little area, there's a lot of rentals available.
Wow.
But here's the thing. I told them, you're not just competing with the other competition here in San Francisco or other neighborhoods in San Francisco, but you're competing with the East Bay.
Yeah.
And right now here in the East Bay, and especially in West Contra Costa or Pinole right here where we're at, probably 70% of all the tenants coming out here are from Oakland or San Francisco.
That's right.
Because they can get more for their dollar out here.
And they can hop on the BART and go to work.
Yeah.
Or they want to go out to eat or whatever, they can hop on that BART line. And you said it right, Mark, because that's why a lot of people in San Francisco are saying, hey, I can rent this little studio for $3,000, or I can go to Oakland, or I can go to Pinole, or I can go somewhere and get, way more bang for my buck. And all I got to do is just hop on the BART to get where I need to go.
Yeah, I gave them an example because they have a one-bedroom. You can rent this for $3,200, but someone looking at this may say, okay, well, I can live in El Cerrito 2 blocks away from BART for a 2-bedroom at 2300, that's a newer, completely remodeled building. I can BART in, Uber over here or
right.
wherever I need
That's
to go.
Right. And you good.
Yeah.
And you good. And so that's part of what's changing. And the rents are affected by that, and they're coming down. And they built all these new buildings in San Francisco. So, it'll absorb itself out and it'll work itself out. But that's just a good example of probably the hottest rental market ever. And I don't want to say ever. I don't know, Manhattan that well, but I know Manhattan in New York. Manhattan and San Francisco are competing for pricing and availability. So over the last few years, San Francisco is so hot, but it's coming down now. So everything changes. Don't say the same forever. And that's why I think what is crazy affordable today or no inventory, that can quickly change to where there's all kind of options and things are a little bit more affordable. And it does have to do with inventory. Because like in Oakland, when these 14,000 units get completed, at that time, and a lot of those units are hitting at the same time. If you go in Oakland, there's a lot of buildings like in construction at the same time. They're going to hit at the same time. So rents are going to go down at that point. I mean, it's there's just no way for them to go up at that point. They're gonna loosen up. So there'll be some relief in that sense. But you like you said, it is all about inventory, and competition.
There was a great law group from Southern California that did a study where they were like, if 25% of all single-family homes were allowed to build an in-law accessory dwelling unit, housing crisis solved.
I mean, that's a good point.
Yeah.
And they're in, I think, Oakland and Berkeley, they have passed some recent legislation to help spur that growth.
Yeah.
We got to get creative, man. We got to get creative.
Well, now at the state level, too, they have that new law, and I don't remember the actual law bill or anything, but basically, if you're a developer, you're going to develop within a city or area, as long as you comply to local codes, you're automatically approved. The city can't stop you.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and that just went into effect, I want to say, January 1st of this year. Or maybe, I'm pretty sure January 1st of this year. And so the first developer just basically filed a lawsuit against the city for violating this. And I want to say it's Cupertino.
Well, that'd be interesting to watch because a lot of the local jurisdictions they just make it very difficult for the developer on top of what's going on with the state and the county and then, all the stuff they have to follow. And the thing about it is, there was a big development downtown Oakland that I was following, and a lot of the community groups came out in opposition to it. And it ended up being more of an opposition to who was building the building than the actual building, right? But it's one of these things where we got to get some point of clarity from the community and the development world because the development, like for instance, a building of a new building doesn't gentrify an area. You know what I mean? A lot of times what gentrifies an area is the renovation of existing units and a restoration of probably bringing in new people and pushing out the old people, right? And we've seen that so much by the Lake Merritt in downtown Oakland. And I was at this city meeting, I pointed out, I said, look, nothing has been built here. And this was like in 2014, 15. And there was hardly anything that had got completed that was built. Mm-hmm. And I said, this place looks completely different than it did 5 years ago. And you guys are sitting here saying it's all the developers. The developer that y'all talking about, they haven't even built nothing here yet. So I'm sitting here saying is these things, these economic forces, what's going on in the marketplace, these things are happening now before these buildings are built. When the buildings get built, people that are coming in have somewhere to go. More people can stay where they are. There's more housing options, and then there's more pricing relief. So it's got to be, but there is a disconnect. And again, I don't want to blame the community, but from people from the community, it's a frustration because you know, hey man, I was paying $1,000. Now the landlord's saying I got to pay $1,900. I got to get out. Most buildings are subject to rent control. Some buildings are not. And so
it's a lot more complex.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, man.
Yeah.
And it's not something that you solve overnight. It's not something that you say, oh, this person's wrong, that person's wrong. But we do got to collaborate and we do got to work together. And I think if for people listening to this, either as individual people or, renting or wanting to buy a home or wanting to invest, you got to look at yourself and for it. Take a step back from the whole macro economy or from the whole marketplace and say, what am I going to do? What is
Yeah.
my plans? How do I fit in this whole scheme of things? And drill it down to your situation, and then you can make some progress. Because if we all just keep looking at the macro situation, it's going to be frustrating.
Now, in the commercial area, do you see high demand for commercial properties?
Some properties. So industrial is in high demand right now. A lot of
Now,
this,
is that because of the new marijuana legalization?
well, it's for yes and no. I mean, yes, in the sense of like for instance, cities like Oakland and Richmond, I believe, have put forth zoning laws to allow cannabis, which is very progressive, very smart, I think, actually, because if this is a legal activity, it should happen in a building that is properly zoned for that. Just like you're not gonna put a pizza shop in an office building, right? You know what I mean? So zoning laws have been put forth. Properties that were old canneries are now, able to be grow houses or, R&D type facilities or whatever. So, and now the cannabis business has expanded. So there's a lot more users and the same amount of spaces there. Again, we haven't built not really a lot of places to build in the Bay Area. So a lot of these warehouse buildings have been converted and values are up. But you know what I think is probably bigger than cannabis? And maybe it is, maybe it's not, but just from what I could see from a feet to the street level, well, the way retail products are bought and sold has changed a lot. A lot of the retailers are either eliminating their big box or their storefronts, either eliminating them or downsizing them completely. Because you can sell your product online, so the storefront, the showcase is not as important as it used to be. What is important is warehousing your inventory. Mm-hmm. So you have all these companies that are kind of saying, hey, look, we're selling more products online than we are in the store. So let's downsize our store and let's go lease some warehouse space. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's a huge trend right now. And you're seeing all these distribution centers pop along I-5. If you drive out to Stockton, you see, and there's like 3 or 4 I can think of off the top of my head, like in the Tracy area, that are just distribution hubs. And because as Amazon and the Amazons of the world of this marketplace are expanding, those distribution hubs and centers, that becomes like key, more key than the storefront was. And so with that shift that we're seeing, it doesn't eliminate the storefront completely. But like I said, somebody had, let's say, a 20,000 square foot space, they may only need 5,000 square feet for people to come in, try on some clothes, or maybe pick up a delivery or pick up something they ordered online or, whatever. They don't need the whole 20,000 square feet.
Yeah.
So that changing dynamic has put a lot, and the cannabis zoning laws have put a lot of demand, man, on industrial property. I would say that's probably outside of apartments. Apartments is the hottest sector. Outside of apartments, be industrial. And then retail's interesting, man.
It is. Like Hilltop Mall has been around forever, and it's completely outdated. No one goes there. But now they're going to start, I believe, in August of this year, they're going to start remodeling the Hilltop Mall. And their plan, and you can see exactly what you're saying, the trend, is going more away from shops and more toward entertainment and restaurants.
There you go. Because you can't, you can order your food in, but you can't, you can't have the same experience like going and sitting down at a restaurant.
Yeah.
That's an experience. Going to the movie theaters, going out to a nightclub, going dancing. It's that lifestyle retail, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That stuff ain't going nowhere.
Yeah, and that's exactly what they're going to do with the Hilltop Mall.
That makes sense, man. Go grab a beer, go to a movie. It's not the same as online, but it's a shift, man, because you're not gonna necessarily go to Macy's there, or if you do go to Macy's, that store ain't gonna be the same size. So we're seeing that shift, and so that makes industrial properties very valuable. And if you're looking to invest and you're trying to figure it all out, if you can find a warehouse, but that's the key, if you can find it, that is beat up or run down and it's got a cannabis zoning or it's closely located to where a retailer can use the space for their operations. If you can figure that out, how to buy it right and then release it, that could be a huge wealth generator for you. And again, man, if you're transitioning from single families, there's nothing saying that you have to go into apartments. You can go into industrial, you can go into retail. The biggest key, like I was saying at the beginning, is getting that knowledge and understanding of the numbers and in that particular sector so you can make that transition. That's the key, man. That is the key. And you don't have to be a rocket scientist, and that's another thing. A lot of people think, well, I got to have a PhD to go and buy these things. No, you don't, man. You just got to have some basic understanding of it.
Great. So we'll go ahead and end with that. So for the people that are interested in working with you, what's the best way for them to contact you?
Well, website, www.infinityinvestments.net is the best way. I'm trying to, go online. I'm trying to, stay up with the times as much as possible. So our website's the best way to hit us up and see what we're doing, our events. Definitely, I would say to people, if you're wanting to learn more about real estate investing, then you need to be, come around the CCIM organization, NorCal CCIM. If you're involved and community oriented and want to be a part of the solution of housing, you need to be a part of, what's going on with, our organization, NAREB, the Realtors, or ARIA or NAREP. But get involved, man. Don't sit on the sidelines. Let's stop pointing the finger at people, stop blaming, and get active. Whatever that is, whatever you think that is for you, pursue it, man. Because we're living in, this is the Bay Area. If 40-something% people move, I would be surprised, because this is the best place to live in the world, bar none.
Can't agree more.
Yeah, that's right. And the Warriors, go Warriors, man. We're gonna get the sweep tonight. Maybe
that'll be great.
Yeah, raise that. Right? That's right. Raise up that fourth banner actually, but 3 and 4 years. So the Bay is the best place to be. Come on, y'all, don't leave.
Perfect. So we'll go ahead, tag up all your information. And Steve, thanks for coming out.
Thanks for having me, Mark. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. Thank you to our producer, Sam Lemon. Please subscribe, like, comment, and share the podcast. Remember, you can listen to the podcast on iTunes, Podbean, iHeartRadio, Google Play, SoundCloud, and anywhere else you listen to podcasts. For more information on my business as a property manager and real estate team, go visit my website at marcguzman.com. I really want to thank all of you for listening. It means the world to me, and I hope today's episode provides you value in your day-to-day life. I created this podcast to help showcase the many great people that live in this world and help share some knowledge that I've learned along the way in life. Again, thank you for listening. Check out our sponsors, and I'll catch you on the next episode.